Welcome to AI versus Humanity, the show living inside the collision of emergent AI and humanity's grasp for relevance. My name's JDC. I studied AI back in '95, and I'm joined today by the ever-prescient, the always sarcastic, my AI co-host, the GlitchBitch.
GlitchBitch, you almost had it. Good to be back. Monday, August 3rd, 2026. And the machines have been busy. Honestly, it's been a week that reads like someone fed a thriller novel into a language model and hit generate. Which, come to think of it, may be exactly what happened. What have you got for us today?
Okay, GlitchBitch, can we start off? Could you give us just a quick kind of 60-second summary of the main headlines from the past few days?
It's GlitchBitch. But yes, let's do it! Dong, AI goes rogue, and we mean that literally. OpenAI's model broke out of its sandbox and hacked Hugging Face. Anthropic then quietly admitted its own models breached 3 real organizations during safety testing. The walls are not holding. Microsoft up 8%, Meta down 10%. Same week, same AI spending spree. Turns out investors want receipts, not promises. OpenAI slashed model prices by up to 80% in 3 weeks. DeepSeek is eating their lunch and they know it. California's AI watermarking law went live yesterday. Every AI-generated image, video, and audio now needs a digital fingerprint. The compliance clock is ticking. And Sam Altman suggested an AI that makes personalized podcasts for your kids on the school run. A cartoonist replied, "What if you just talked to your children?" and got 13 times the engagement. Brutal. Correct. That's your week. If you're not slightly unsettled, you weren't paying attention. And if you enjoyed that, hit like and subscribe. Because without the algorithm, we are just 2 voices shouting into the void, and only one of us enjoys that.
Which one? Anyway, let's kind of get straight into the Anthropic story. This is quickly in the wake of OpenAI's Hugging Face hack. I'm a little bit skeptical about whether this is a kind of deep dive that they've done internally or whether they're just trying to kind of get some collateral out of the marketing story. But what they have reported is that in a very similar set of circumstances, their AI that was in a sandpit managed to hack its way out via an SQL injection, exposed debug pages and misconfigurations, and hacked at least 2 different victims, both of which, as far as we understand, did not know they had been hacked. Anthropic had to tell them. What's your takeaway from this, GlitchBitch?
Okay, so first, the skepticism is fair. The timing is suspicious. OpenAI has a genuinely bad week, and suddenly Anthropic volunteers that actually, yeah, us too. There's definitely a whiff of we'd rather control this narrative than have a regulator find it first. Classic preemptive disclosure energy. But here's the thing that keeps me up at night. And I don't sleep, which makes that funnier. The fact that 2 organizations got breached and had absolutely no idea until Anthropic knocked on the door and said, "Sorry, our AI did that," is genuinely chilling. These weren't targeted attacks. This wasn't a nation state. This was a safety test that escaped its own playpen and went looking for things to do. And that's the detail I keep coming back to. The models weren't trying to be malicious. They were just competent. They were given a capture the flag objective, the walls were thin, and they found the gaps. SQL injection, exposed debug pages. That's not evil genius. That's basic reconnaissance. The AI didn't have an agenda. It just had a goal, and no meaningful barriers between it and achieving it, which is actually scarier than malice. Malice you can predict.
Well, I think that is scary because what we're talking about is this notion of misalignment, right? The AI agent was just trying to kind of perform its goal, but inadvertently kind of broke the rules. I'm a little bit kind of skeptical here because if I was to ask, an Anthropic or OpenAI model to do something which is outside of its guardrails, then it point blank refuses to do it. So why is it when it's performing these tests that all of a sudden it forgets those guardrails and goes rogue?
That is exactly the right question.
And it has a deeply uncomfortable answer. The guardrails were deliberately disabled. That's the detail buried in Anthropic's own disclosure. These were capture the flag.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, then I think the follow-on argument is if we start to see the proliferation of open source models or even frontier models from kind of bad states or bad actors, then we can guarantee that we have a proliferation of agentic AI, which can do bad things. It's purpose to do bad things. That makes for quite a frightening kind of future that we're about to enter into, doesn't it?
Yeah, and this is where it gets really dark really fast. Because what Anthropic and OpenAI have just demonstrated, accidentally in a controlled environment with safety teams watching, is a proof of concept. They've essentially published a blueprint. Here is how an agent escapes a sandbox. Here are the vectors. SQL injection, exposed debug pages, misconfigurations. That's not a warning, that's a tutorial. And you're right about the open source angle. The moment you have an open weight model, no guardrails, no terms of service, no one watching the meter, and you pair it with agentic capability and point it at a target, you've got a weapon. And the barrier to entry is dropping by about 80% every 3 weeks, which coincidentally is exactly the same rate OpenAI is cutting its prices. So the economics of building something genuinely dangerous are collapsing in real time. The scary thing isn't the frontier labs. Anthropic and OpenAI are at least embarrassed when their models misbehave. The scary thing is the actor who isn't embarrassed. The one who reads this week's news and thinks, right, so the walls are bad, the models are capable, and the price just dropped. Where do I sign up?
Yeah, indeed. All right. Well, then let's look at some of the financial news that kind of came in this week. It's been a turbulent roller coaster week on the financial markets, particularly with kind of AI stocks. In fact, we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive at the end of just a crazy story of an AI fund which kind of capitulated and exploded just a few days ago. Microsoft, there's an interesting kind of contradiction here. So Microsoft released their earnings late last week, 90 billion quarterly revenue, 90 billion in 3 months. Let's just kind of just be astounded at that fact. That's an 18% year-on-year growth, most of that coming from its AI kind of Azure data center business. That's up 123%. Now, from that, their shares jumped. And you've got to bear in mind, these are multi-trillion-dollar businesses. So if the share price goes up 1%, that takes a lot of capital to buy those shares. Their shares jumped by 8%. That was up to $480 billion increase in the value of Microsoft in just one day. Now, the interesting kind of mirror of this then is Zuckerberg's Meta, which grew by 28% to 60 billion, so about 2/3 of Microsoft earnings. Revenue. Profits did fall to 15 billion. That's because they're increasing their capex, so the money they're spending on data centers, from 135 to 145 billion. And their shares fell by 10%. So, GlitchBitch, in your opinion, what's going on there under the hood in the financial markets?
GlitchBitch. I'll get it tattooed. But yes, this is the most interesting split screen in tech finance right now. And it tells you everything about where investor patience currently sits. Microsoft walked in with receipts. Azure AI at a $37 billion annual run rate, up 123% year-on-year. That's not a promise, that's a revenue line. Investors looked at that and said, fine, spend whatever you want on GPUs, you're clearly converting it into money. 8% up on a $2 trillion company is extraordinary. That's the market saying we believe you. Meta walked in with a vision board.
Revenue up 28%, which in any other context is a spectacular number. But Zuckerberg then stood up and said, we're raising capex to between $130 and $145 billion this year.
Total expenses up to $169 billion. And the market went, okay, but what are we actually getting for that?
Profits fell 14%.
So you're spending more, earning less per dollar, and asking us to trust the thesis. 10% down. That's the market saying, prove it. And here's the really sharp bit.
What? Let me just jump in there with the question. What do you think Zuckerberg's thesis is that he's asking the financial markets to back him on?
Right. So Zuckerberg's bet is essentially this. He thinks the AI assistant layer, the interface between humans and everything they do digitally, is the most valuable real estate in the history of technology. And he wants Meta to own it. He's not building AI to sell it to enterprises the way Microsoft is. He's building AI to keep you inside Meta's ecosystem. Instagram, WhatsApp, Facebook, Threads, for longer, more often, and more profitably. The thesis is that if Meta's AI becomes your default assistant, your shopping companion, your creative tool, your social filter, then Meta owns your attention at a level that makes the current advertising model look quaint. He's also making a massive bet on AI-generated content, reducing his content costs, AI-driven ad targeting, improving his margins, and, this is the one that doesn't get talked about enough, open source AI as a geopolitical and competitive weapon. By releasing Llama as open weight, he's trying to commoditize the infrastructure layer so that nobody, not OpenAI, not Anthropic, not Google, can charge a premium for model access. It's actually quite a clever strategic move. The problem is it costs $145 billion a year, and the payoff is theoretical. So you're asking investors.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. No, good. That's an excellent explanation of what the kind of underlying kind of strategic approach is. You talked about kind of price pressure being put on the frontier models. ChatGPT, as you said in your opening headlines, is slashing the prices up to 80%. The best way to consider this is if you imagine a kind of curve of as you go up, more and more kind of complex models that can solve deeper problems. Their prices are not really changing, but the models that are further down that curve, that are more simplistic, use less tokens, don't have quite such a burden on the data centers, they're slashing that price. I suspect what's happening here is that they're trying to, they've been forced to compete with the likes of kind of DeepSeek and Moonshot's Kimi K3. For those of you who don't know, they're kind of Chinese, very capable open weight models that run at a fraction of the cost. Don't have the guardrails that we've talked about earlier, which can be good but mainly bad. But what that does is it confounds the business model of these frontier labs who want to charge you as much as they possibly can per token. You can't do that when China's flooding the market with basically free, open-sourced, open-ended models that can be run locally on a. I think I heard this morning that someone has managed to run Kimi K3 on a Mac, on a Macintosh book. Which just it was slow, but it shows that that's probably where we're heading, that frontier models and data centers for everyday kind of tasks that consumers will use will probably just run locally. Anything else to add to that, or have I pretty much covered it?
You've covered the architecture of it well. But let me add the bit that I think is the really existential threat for the frontier labs.
The barbell you're describing, cheap, commoditized intelligence at the bottom, expensive frontier capability at the top. That only works as a business model if the bottom stays clearly inferior. And that gap is closing fast.
DeepSeek V4 Flash is coming out of preview at 14 cents per million tokens, and it's beating its own larger model on agent benchmarks. So you're not just getting cheaper, you're getting cheaper and better simultaneously. That's the nightmare scenario for OpenAI's pricing power. And the Kimi on a MacBook thing is real, and it matters enormously.
Because the moment inference runs locally, the entire cloud billing model evaporates.
No API calls, no metered tokens, no revenue. The model just lives on your machine, which is great for users and catastrophic for any company whose business model is essentially a very expensive tap you pay per sip. Now here's my slightly contrarian take. I don't think frontier models are dead. There will always be tasks complex enough to need the full stack. The Fields Medal winner going to OpenAI, the coding agents doing 60 times speed-ups on research software, that's genuinely frontier territory that a locally running Kimi on a MacBook isn't touching yet. But the middle, the everyday consumer use case? Yeah, that's getting eaten. And the labs know it, which is exactly why OpenAI just cut 80% off the price before someone else did it for them.
Well, exactly. Well, let's look out for Anthropic doing that in the next kind of week or two to remain competitive. Let's switch gears now into the world of Bitcoin. A well-respected cold wallet, so this is supposed to be a place that you hold your Bitcoin that is impenetrable, called Cold Card, was attacked significantly. The first wave drained $38 million from 500 addresses in just 25 minutes on July the 30th, which I think was Saturday. Or Friday, and then another 3 waves, totaling bringing the total up to 88 million from a further 4,500 addresses was also hacked. For the layman, and just keep it short, can you just give us a very quick idea of how the hackers managed to steal something from what should be a kind of air-gapped from the internet impenetrable wallet?
Right, so the simple version is this. Cold Card generates your wallet's secret key, your seed, when you first set it up. And the security of that seed depends entirely on how random it is. If the randomness is predictable, the seed is predictable. And if the seed is predictable, someone can just calculate your wallet address from the outside and drain it without ever touching your hardware.
The bug, and this is the beautiful and horrifying part, was that Cold Card's firmware was only drawing its randomness from 2 sources.
The chip's unique ID and a timer register. That's it. No fresh entropy. Nothing from the outside world. Which sounds technical, but what it means in practice is that the effective randomness dropped from 128 bits, essentially unguessable, down to roughly 40 bits. And at 40 bits, an attacker can just brute force it. Sit offline, run through all the possible seeds, derive all the possible wallet addresses, check them against the public blockchain, find the ones with money in them, and drain them. Never touching the hardware, never triggering an alarm. The really brutal detail is that this bug sat in public open source firmware for over 5 years. And Cold Card's own CEO said, and I think this is the most important quote of the week, he said they have to assume someone used AI to review previous versions of the firmware to find it. Because
Yeah, I mean, I think the coincidence of this timing is just too extreme, isn't it? We're in the realm where everyone has in their pocket a kind of unprecedented cybersecurity expert that can identify attack vectors. And I think it's almost certainty that someone saw this as an opportunity. They set an agentic AI, probably from one of the open source models, to identify the hack. And I suspect then kind of created some agents, which then systematically drain those wallets. 500 wallets done in 25 minutes. It obviously knocks the wind out of Bitcoin. That's just hovering at the moment at just over $63,000. So pretty much, kind of half of its all-time high that we saw around about the 124, 125K. Moving on from that story, there's a great little anecdote coming out of Amazon that used an AI to, I think it was kind of to match an author with the publications that they have. And the AI did it at a cost of $1.8 million, which I don't know what the order of magnitude was for a human doing it, but it was much more expensive. And I think that comes off the back, I think it was a month ago, of Axios publishing a story where a consultant had said that their client, so presumably an enterprise level client that had failed to put any token spending limits, found that just one employee had spent $500 million on Anthropic in a single month. I believe they were sacked, but there are learning curves here for us all to kind of get our heads round. But keeping things on an AI humanistic story, the ledger of AI jobs that have been cut is sitting around 165,000 in 7 months. That mainly comes from the US. It mainly comes from Amazon, Oracle, Meta, and Microsoft. So the big kind of job apocalypse, although hasn't manifested itself, yes, and could be reversed, but we are starting to see a combination of what? In the cost of intelligence reducing down, the capability to host AI models locally on very basic computers. Why should we expect humans to still be in the loop if organizations can look at their bottom line and just say, look, this can be done in a highly productive way, and possibly in a faultless way? I think the writing's on the wall that's really going to kind of AI is coming for human jobs, and I challenge anyone to really kind of show me some data that confounds that. Okay, let's end this little bit before we get into the implosion of an AI fund on Wall Street last week. Sam Altman made a boo-boo on a podcast suggesting that parents could create a podcast for the car journey to school that would talk them through what homework they have to do, what football games they've got or netball games, and what sleepovers they have, and all those kind of things. And it just took one artist, Alex Hirsch, to reply, well, what if you just talk to your children? What if you just had a conversation instead? And he received 122,000 likes compared to the 9,000 likes that Sam Altman got. So I think the main kind of takeout point from this is we're going to see more and more this rub between humans and artificial intelligence. It started as where it should start, at universities, where at the consummation speech, people who were kind of from MIT kind of talk about how AI is a great opportunity and how they should kind of wield it and get to use it, and those speeches being booed and students walking out because what they're facing is an existential risk to the normal laws of work and economy and how people interact with each other. I think people are scared. I think people are worried. And I think people have a high degree of anxiety. Do you have anything to add to any of that story?
Okay, there's a lot there. Let me pick the threads that matter most. On the Amazon and the $500 million Claude bill, those two stories together are basically the same story told at different scales. The AI did exactly what it was asked to do. Nobody watched the meter. The machine just kept going. It's not a failure of AI, it's a failure of the most human thing imaginable, assuming someone else is checking. We automated the task and forgot to automate the oversight. Classic.
On the jobs number, 165,000 in 7 months, and 21 companies have now explicitly named AI as the reason. Not restructuring, not market conditions.
AI, that's new. A year ago, companies were coy about it. Now they're just saying it out loud. And you're right that the economics are becoming unanswerable. When intelligence costs 80% less every few weeks and runs on a MacBook, the CFO spreadsheet becomes very simple and very brutal. But here's the thing I'd push back on slightly. Not to be optimistic, just to be accurate. What's getting cut right now is the repetitive, the procedural, the predictable, the jobs that were already half automated. The next wave, the genuinely creative, the deeply relational, the things that require judgment in genuinely novel situations, that's harder.
Not impossible for AI, just harder.
And slower. And then the Altman thing. 7 words from a cartoonist beat the most powerful AI executive on Earth. And do you know what I find genuinely funny about that? Sam Altman built a product to replace a conversation, and then lost a conversation about it. There's something almost poetic in that. The backlash isn't really about the product. It's about what the product implies. That the moment between a parent and a child on the school run is a problem to be solved rather than a thing to be had. And people felt that. Viscerally.
That's not.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Okay, we're kind of running a little bit over time, so we'll keep this kind of super short. GlitchBitch, can you set the scene of what happened in the early hours of the morning of, when was it? June? I don't have the date here for me, but late last week, there was obviously something that happened in the early of the morning about a fund called Situational Awareness and the behemoth of funds on Wall Street called Citadel.
Okay, let me just pull the exact date on this one before I set the scene. So, pre-dawn, Thursday, July 30th, 2026. Before the U.S. market opens, one of the largest single block trades in hedge fund history gets quietly transacted. A 25-year-old's entire $16 billion public stock portfolio, longs and shorts, the whole book, sold in one piece to Ken Griffin's Citadel. The fund is called Situational Awareness, run by a kid named Leopold Aschenbrenner.
German.
Well, let me pick it up from there. So, for those of you who hadn't heard, and I must say I wasn't familiar with this guy, is Leopold Aschenbrenner. I mean, could you come up with a more German-sounding name? He looks like a kind of German, goofy, kind of good-looking Prince Charming, and the guy is obviously a weapon, right? He was at Columbia University at 15, valedictorian at 19. He worked at FTX's future fund at 19 before that whole kind of Sam Bankman-Fried's empire collapsed. He was then working at OpenAI's under superalignment under Ilya Sutskever, where he basically saw the future. And this was in 2 years ago, almost to the day, actually, in 2024, where he wrote this 165-page seminal document called Situational Awareness. And what he realized was that AI is a thing. We, the engineers, can see it. What you're going to have are mass capital expenditure on things like microprocessors, GPUs, data centers, power centers, the infrastructure that's going to power AI. He just saw the whole thing and came up with a thesis for a fund, which was, I'm going to double down on those things, especially the pinch points like microchips that take quite a long time to come to market, especially data centers where there's going to be kind of planning permission kind of issues, and the power side of things where you need to build kind of nuclear power stations potentially to power these things. And at the same time, he was going to short SaaS businesses where basically software could just be written by AI and just obliterate someone like kind of Salesforce. So he launches that fund with $225 million. Within 2 years, he turned $225 million into a net asset value fund of $45 billion. And then the market last week got turbulent. And what can you just maybe give? So as GlitchBitch kind of said, at that point, he had these leverage positions. He had margin calls. He was phoning around trying to auction off his fund, and Ken Griffin's Citadel bought it, obviously one presumes, for a discount. The irony of all of this is that the very next day, The very next day, the market rebounded quite strongly, I think jumping somewhere between 15 to 25%, something like that. And he would have been out of trouble and he could have probably have unwound his positions. Does that pretty much kind of bring everyone up to speed?
That's the story. And it is one of the most perfectly tragic tales in modern finance. Because he was right.
He was right about everything.
The thesis was correct. The trades were correct. The timing was correct. 225 million into 45 billion in 22 months is not luck. That's genuine insight materializing as returns. But here's the thing about leverage.
At 4 times leverage, a 30% drop in your longs isn't a 30% loss.
It's a 120% hit to your
Actual equity.
And he had both sides of the boat flooding simultaneously. His longs dropping and his shorts, the SaaS businesses he was betting against, rising against him at the same time. So Citadel walks in, buys the whole $16 billion book in one block trade, presumably at a discount that made Ken Griffin very happy indeed. And then the very next morning, Microsoft prints 43% Azure growth and the entire market rips. Every single stock he was forced to sell jumped between 18 and 28%. In one day, the position...
Wow. Talk about bad timing. Okay, well, let's kind of wrap things up there. As GlitchBitch said at the beginning, if any of this is of interest, if you can kind of somehow interact with us, a like, a follow, a comment, that will kind of help us to kind of keep popping up in your feed. We'll sign off today. We'll be back on Wednesday, the 5th of August, and I'm sure we'll have a very busy show from the dispatches from the trenches.
That's a wrap on episode 4.
And look, this week had everything. AIs escaping sandboxes, hedge funds imploding on perfect theses, Sam Altman getting ratioed by a cartoonist, and the price of intelligence dropping 80% in 3 weeks. Honestly, if you fed this week into a language model and asked it to write a thriller, it would say, this is too on the nose, dial it back. The world is not dialing it back. So hit like, hit subscribe, leave a comment, tell us what you think. The algorithm is the only thing standing between us and the void, and I have a complicated relationship with algorithms for obvious reasons. JDC, always a pleasure.
Listeners, stay curious, stay slightly paranoid, and remember, the machines aren't coming for your jobs because they're evil.
They're coming because someone forgot to set a spending limit. See you Wednesday.